This is a story my grandfather told me. Judging by his age, this incident must have happened in the 1970s in a rural area. In those years, every family faced hardship, especially my grandfather's older sister's family, my great-aunt. They had many mouths to feed but little land. After contributing their public grain quota, they didn't have enough food to last until the end of the year. My grandfather was then just over 20, in the prime of his youth, and his farming yielded many work points, so he had a relative surplus of grain. As it happened, right after the harvest, he decided to take a sack of rice to his older sister's house. But for some reason that day, the road, which was usually very familiar, felt somewhat disorienting once he passed the county town. Before him was a three-way fork in the road. He had been to his sister's house several times but didn't recall ever passing through here. While he was hesitating about which way to go, a man carrying farm tools approached from one of the paths, looking as if he had just returned from the fields. My grandfather hurriedly asked for directions. The old man replied that the place he wanted to go was still very far. If he took this road, it would be more than 20 kilometers. Hearing this, my grandfather's head buzzed. Hadn't he been going the wrong way all afternoon? In those years, that region was very desolate. There were no proper roads between villages, and they were often separated by tens of kilometers. Getting lost was not uncommon. There was no other way. My grandfather thanked the old man, shouldered the sack of grain, and continued on his journey. The 20-kilometer journey took him until 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and he still hadn't arrived. The forest road was gloomy, and houses became increasingly sparse. My grandfather had been walking since morning without a drop of water or a bite of food the entire way. Coupled with carrying the sack of grain, he was both tired and hungry. He felt that if he continued like this, he might faint. Just then, he saw a faint light flickering ahead. Looking up, he saw what appeared to be a house by the roadside in the forest. This made my grandfather overjoyed. Even if he could only go in to ask for a sip of water, it would be good. Moreover, as he got closer, my grandfather saw what seemed to be several figures moving inside the house. This was even better. At least it showed the owner hadn't slept yet, so it wouldn't be considered a disturbance. Thinking this, my grandfather quickened his pace. Unexpectedly, upon entering the house, my grandfather discovered it wasn't a residence, but a small city god temple. In the temple, besides the earthen statue of the city god, there was an altar and a white candle. Nothing else, and certainly no people. However, that white candle didn't emit the usual yellow light, but a pale, cold white. But my grandfather was young then and didn't pay much attention to these things. He was truly too tired. He found a corner against a wall and sat down. As soon as he sat down, fatigue and sleepiness overwhelmed him. He thought to himself, perhaps he could just stay here for one night and continue his journey in the morning. But my grandfather didn't know at that time there's a rural proverb, better to sleep in a desolate grave than in a desolate temple. This saying has much truth. Sure enough, while sleeping in the middle of the night, an icy cold wind blew from somewhere, extinguishing the candle. As soon as the candlelight went out, a strange bluish-green light appeared, accompanied by a rustling, shuffling sound within the small temple. My grandfather was a light sleeper. The sound grew louder and clearer, waking him up. My grandfather groggily opened his eyes and saw many people standing before the altar of this small temple. He didn't know what they were doing. In his sleepy daze, he peeked through half-open eyes and saw figures continuously entering from outside, gathering into a crowd. But these people said nothing, standing there one by one with bowed heads, and it was unclear what they were doing. Thinking that he was, after all, a guest seeking shelter, my grandfather, fearing they might be displeased, spoke up to greet them, hoping not to disturb everyone. Unexpectedly, as soon as my grandfather opened his mouth, those people hearing his voice all turned in unison to look at him. Only then did my grandfather realize that those people were all very strange. No, strange couldn't describe it. These were fundamentally not people. Clearly a horde of ghosts. Their faces were deathly pale, eyes empty. Some were clearly missing parts here and there. After seeing them clearly, my grandfather was scared to death. He let out a blood-curdling scream and hid in the corner, tightly clutching the sack of rice. He dared not move. The horde of ghosts began to move again, forming a circle, relentlessly closing in on my grandfather. As the ghosts drew nearer, my grandfather felt the surrounding temperature drop, so cold that he shivered uncontrollably. He stammered, begging them not to eat him, that he was a good person who had never harmed anyone. At this moment, among the crowd, a long-haired female ghost came very close to my grandfather, its head swaying back and forth around him. This ghost was so bizarre it caught my grandfather's attention. Its hair was so long it swept the ground, and its neck stretched out to over 1 meter long. Seeing my grandfather staring intently at it, that female ghost sidled even closer, its mouth emitting a woo-woo sound that terrified my grandfather out of his wits. This scene was truly too shocking, and on top of that, my grandfather hadn't had a grain of rice or a drop of water all day. He screamed, "Don't eat me!" He yelled, "Help!" After that blood-curdling scream, both terrified and exhausted, he felt darkness envelop him. Then he fainted, completely unconscious, no longer aware of what was happening around him. It wasn't until the next morning that my grandfather's screams for help echoed again from within this small, desolate temple. "Is anyone there? Help me!" That's right, my grandfather had regained consciousness. The ghosts were gone, but the sight before him once again terrified him. It turned out, this small, desolate temple had completely changed overnight. The walls were dilapidated, tiles broken, cobwebs everywhere. Even the statue of the city god was tattered beyond recognition. But clearly, last night he had seen it was still quite new. My grandfather looked at the dish that held the strange candle last night. The candle had burned out, only a little wax remained at the bottom. My grandfather dared not think about what had happened. He shouldered the sack of grain and rushed out of the small temple, not daring to look back even once. It was nearly noon when he finally reached his older sister's house. After recounting what happened the previous night, he learned a few things about that small, desolate temple from his sister's parents-in-law. Legend had it that this city god temple used to be very prosperous with incense and offerings, but later, during the war years, many refugees fleeing famine often stayed there. These people were either starving or sick. The number of people dying in that small, desolate temple increased day by day. Over time, rumors spread that the city god temple was haunted. Gradually, no one came to offer incense anymore. The temple thus became desolate, turning into a dwelling place for wandering, malevolent spirits. Recently, this story has been circulating throughout our apartment complex. I often hear the old folks recounting it in the small square. The story goes like this. In the western part of our complex, there's a public restroom. The cleaner is an elderly janitor woman who also lives in this complex. About 5 or 6 days ago, early in the morning, the janitor auntie knocked on the door of the men's restroom. Hearing no one inside, she intended to enter to clean. As soon as she pulled back the curtain and looked in, the sight before her startled her terribly. A young man was lying stiffly on the ground. It was unclear if he was alive or dead. Looking closely, she recognized him as the young man Tony. The janitor auntie often saw that young man in our complex. He lived on the 3rd floor, a single young man working as a laborer. The janitor auntie quickly called the management office staff and also called for an ambulance to take him to the hospital. Fortunately, after an examination, the young man's condition was not too serious. According to the doctor's diagnosis, it might have been due to nerve paralysis after drinking alcohol coupled with a fall, which caused him to lose consciousness. When he woke up, his family asked him what on earth had happened that made him faint in the restroom. Tony said the cause was not as the doctor diagnosed. Then, with a face still showing shock, he recounted his experience from the previous night to everyone. It turned out that the night before, Tony had gone out for a gathering and drinks with some colleagues. He indeed drank quite a lot, and by the time he got home, it was already midnight. While still at the party, he felt nothing, but on the way home, after a jolt from the taxi, he got out to walk into the apartment complex. With alcohol in his system and the night breeze blowing, his stomach immediately churned, wanting to vomit. Just as he was passing by that public restroom, Tony rushed straight inside to relieve himself. Late at night, there was no one around. Tony just went into a random stall and vomited profusely. After vomiting for a while, his stomach still felt uncomfortable. He started to stick his fingers down his throat, intending to vomit out all the alcohol. But once he started, he couldn't stop, as if he had to empty everything before he could stand up. The public restroom at night had motion sensor lights that flickered on and off. At first, Tony didn't pay much attention, but one time after the lights went off and then on again, Tony suddenly felt something was wrong, as if something around him had just changed. But how could such a small stall change? Tony thought he was probably drunk and couldn't see clearly. Just then, something suddenly flashed before his eyes. He then realized it was a face looking at him from beneath the partition of the adjacent stall. Upon being discovered, the face quickly retracted. In the middle of the night, it was clear there was no one when he entered. Yet now, a face suddenly appeared in this place, truly startling Tony. It took Tony a moment to react. He thought perhaps someone was in the next stall without his knowledge. Feeling a bit embarrassed and also strange, he told the person not to look like that, to be careful, or they might get vomited on. To break the awkward silence, he mumbled something like that to feel less embarrassed, but the other person didn't respond at all. The nausea returned. Tony at this point had no mind to bother about anything else. His stomach churned again, and he continued to bend over, vomiting heavily. After struggling until his head was muddled, he finally vomited everything out. His stomach felt much lighter, and he intended to slowly stand up. But just then, he suddenly saw that face appear again. It was unclear how long it had been staring at him from beneath the partition. This time, upon being discovered, the face even looked straight into Tony's eyes, its gaze somewhat demonic before quickly retracting again. Tony started to feel he couldn't stand it anymore. In the middle of the night like this, were they trying to scare him to death? He banged on the partition while loudly scolding the other person for having such a grotesque peeping habit. But after yelling a few sentences, the other side remained completely silent, not a single sound. Tony found it strange, so he leaned over, bent down, and looked through the gap under the partition into the next stall. But unexpectedly, it was completely empty inside, no one at all. Could that person have run away so quickly? But he clearly hadn't heard any noise. He turned around and flushed the toilet, wondering what on earth was happening. The more Tony thought, the more he felt something was wrong. That person definitely hadn't drew 9 out of 10. They were clinging to the partition, hanging their whole body up to avoid detection. Thinking this person was a pervert, Tony, still emboldened by a bit of alcohol, felt a surge of anger and decided to teach him a lesson. He stepped out and forcefully pulled open the door of the adjacent stall. But as soon as he pulled the door open and looked inside, Tony froze. It was truly empty inside, and everything was clean, with no signs that anyone had just been there. "Damn it, so strange," he mumbled. "Did I see wrong, or did that person run off without me hearing anything?" Since no one was there, he had no choice. Tony went back out to the wash basin, intending to wash up to sober up and then go home. The wash basin in the restroom was directly opposite the toilet stalls. One could clearly see behind them in the mirror. Precisely because of this position, when Tony looked up into the mirror, he nearly jumped out of his skin, because he discovered a figure behind him staring intently at him. It was that same perverted dark figure, still standing in that toilet stall. But that stall, hadn't he just checked it? Moreover, looking closely at the figure now, its head was tilted to an extent that a normal person couldn't achieve, almost parallel to its shoulder. Tony was too scared to speak. He quickly turned his head, and the dark figure was right behind him. He stammered, asking if it was human or ghost, though in his heart he was already frozen with fear. This time the figure no longer hid but stepped out from the toilet stall, approaching Tony. He panickedly screamed for it not to come near him. As it got closer, Tony realized the thing was over 2 meters tall. When it tilted its head, it could touch the ceiling. The sight was truly too horrifying. Tony let out a piercing scream, then felt his vision go black, fainting instantly. Recounting this, Tony's face turned pale again. He looked up at the janitor auntie and the property manager of the apartment complex, wondering if it was a ghost. Hearing this, the janitor auntie looked somewhat awkwardly towards the manager. However, the manager believed he was drunk and had misseen things, advising him to rest well first. Tony felt something was amiss and wanted to ask for more details. But the manager and the janitor auntie didn't say much more, only offering a few words of comfort, telling him to drink less in the future, then hastily left. But the story of Tony encountering a ghost in the restroom quickly spread throughout the complex. Within a few days, Tony found a new place and moved out. Actually, everyone in this complex knew that a year ago, a drunk person had also fallen and died in that public restroom. It's unclear if this is related to Tony's incident. This strange story began when I moved to work at a new company. I decided to rent a room in a residential area near the company. When I moved into this residential area, I encountered a very strange incident, which filled me with a vague sense of unease. I faintly heard a woman's voice, asking people around, seemingly trying to find her son. Right at the gate of the residential complex, a middle-aged woman, clearly unhinged, immediately caught my attention. Her whole body was filthy, her hair disheveled. She would rush towards anyone passing by, then describe her child, his height, build. Although she spoke incoherently, coupled with her frantic demeanor and stammering words, it was still understandable that she was looking for her child. Most people had no patience for this mad woman. Hardly anyone wanted to pay her any mind. Some young people, upon seeing her dirty hand reach out, even cursed her to her face, telling her to get lost. But she kept rushing towards people regardless, and I, having just moved into this area, naturally fell into her sights. Seeing her ask, I immediately waved my hand and gave a cursory reply, saying I had just moved here and didn't know. In my heart, I was just afraid this woman wasn't normal and might do something extreme. After hearing my reply, the madwoman became dazed, her eyes lifeless. Then she put her finger to her mouth, bit her nail, and began to mumble her son's name distractedly. I immediately took the opportunity to slip away, hastily striding into the apartment complex to avoid the madwoman as quickly as possible. At that time, I didn't pay much attention to this matter until a few days later one night, I encountered the madwoman again. That day, the company held a party. After eating, we went for karaoke for a while, and it was well past midnight when I returned to the residential complex. Just as I passed the gate, about to go upstairs, I suddenly heard a strange peal of laughter coming from a dark corner downstairs. I turned my head to look and saw in the darkness downstairs what seemed to be two people, judging by their figures, an adult and a child about 4 or 5 years old. The laughter sounded familiar, but I couldn't immediately recall who it was. Out of curiosity, I took out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and shone it in that direction. Unexpectedly, the person standing by the wall was none other than the madwoman, and in front of her stood a child. At a glance, the child looked like her son, but why had she been frantically saying her son was missing a few days ago? I was bewildered. What on earth was going on? She was stroking the boy's head, smiling happily, her mouth constantly exclaiming joyfully that she had found her son. Finding it strange, I also approached and asked, "Ma'am, it's the middle of the night. What are you doing standing here with a child?" The madwoman also noticed me. She looked up at me, giggled, and said that she had found her son. I then advised her to quickly take her child home. It was so late to be out with the child. Her family would be very worried. Seeing her crazed appearance, I felt pity, so I tried to strike up a conversation with the child. I said it was late, very cold outside, and I could help take them home. However, after calling out several times, the child didn't react at all, just stood silently in front of his mother, not moving a muscle. Just as I was about to gently pat the boy's shoulder, he finally turned his head, and immediately afterward, I witnessed a sight that made my skin crawl. The child's head suddenly rotated a full 180 degrees, its grotesque face twisted backward, and that face looked as if it had been flayed, a bloody, mangled mess. Moreover, the entire head was slightly misshapen, deformed as if no longer human. The sight made me scream out in terror. Startled so unexpectedly that I couldn't react, I was so scared I fell flat on the ground, my whole body trembling violently. At that moment, my mind went blank. I couldn't believe what I'd just seen, my whole body shaking. I still managed to raise my phone to shine the light on the boy again. But, as expected, what I saw was still a scene that made my scalp tingle. The madwoman was hugging the child, which was definitely not human. However, she just kept hugging it, showing no signs of fear, and smiled very happily, like a mother who had truly reunited with her child. It took me several minutes to regain my composure. No longer caring about anything else, I immediately turned and fled for my life. I ran headlong as fast as I could without daring to look back. Behind me, the laughter of the mother and child still echoed, as if reverberating from the underworld. After that evening, I went around the apartment complex, intentionally asking about the mother and child. I then learned a heartbreaking story. It turned out this mad woman had originally lived right in this complex. She had a son about 5 to 6 years old. That day, she took her son down to the compound to play. After a while, the child said he was thirsty. She left him there, intending to quickly run to the nearby supermarket to buy a bottle of water. But in just a moment, when she returned, her child had disappeared. She searched everywhere, asked everyone, but couldn't find him. Afterwards, although she reported it to the police, the child was never found. From then on, the woman, due to the shock of losing her child, went completely insane. Every day she wandered around this apartment complex looking for her son. After a few years, she ended up in her current state. Thinking back now, I believe it's very likely that the madwoman's son met with some misfortune. This strange story happened to my close college friend. At that time, she had just had an abortion and was also dumped by her boyfriend. For several days, she didn't return to the dormitory, staying cooped up in the rental room she previously shared with her boyfriend. As it was the weekend, I went over to see how she was doing. I had to knock for a long time before my friend slowly came to open the door. When she pulled the door open, she seemed a little surprised to see me. Looking at her, I was startled. Her face was sallow, her eye sockets sunken, looking pitifully haggard. I pressed her, asking if she felt unwell anywhere. Seeing me, my friend's mood seemed to improve a little. She said she was a bit tired, but it was nothing. Perhaps a little rest would make her feel better. She invited me in. As she turned to pour me some water, she asked if any of our friends in the dorm had asked about her. The small rental room had no tables or chairs, so I flopped down onto the small bed and replied to my friend that everyone had asked, but I just said she was busy with something these past few days and nothing more. After pouring a full glass of water, my friend brought it over to me. Only now did I have a chance to observe my friend more closely, and I suddenly froze. There was a bruise on my friend's neck. The bruise was quite large, clearly visible on one side of her neck. She kept touching her neck, not understanding what I was saying. I then reached for a small mirror and showed it to her. It seemed she herself was unaware of its existence, nor did she know how it got there. My friend looked in the mirror, also wondering why, but then guessed it was probably a mosquito bite from the previous night, likely nothing serious. I was still a bit worried and suggested we go to the hospital for a checkup, but she shook her head saying it wasn't necessary. Then, to reassure me, she suggested we go out to eat something and turned to change her clothes. Thinking it was just a minor issue, neither of us paid much attention to it. Perhaps my friend had been cooped up in her room for too long, so we went out strolling until evening. After eating a bit at the night market and wandering around for over 2 hours, seeing it was quite late, I returned to her rental room to spend the night. We chatted cheerfully for a while, then went to sleep together. Around midnight, while I was sleeping, I suddenly heard some strange sounds. The noise wasn't too loud, but it woke me up. I peeked open my eyes, thinking my friend had gotten up to use the restroom, so I didn't bother. Thinking that, I just turned over to the other side, closed my eyes, and intended to go back to sleep. But very quickly, I realized something was wrong. The sound seemed to be coming from my friend herself. I then turned to look at her. Indeed, I didn't know if she was having a nightmare or what, but she kept making strange, incessant sounds. Seeing my friend didn't look well, I softly called her name, then intended to give her a gentle push, hoping to help her turn over to be more comfortable. But just as I reached out my hand, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of a small dark shadow wriggling beneath my friend's chest. I looked towards that dark shadow and the sight I saw nearly scared the soul out of me. My face turned pale with fear. A newborn baby with sallow, bluish-gray skin, its face contorted ferociously, was crawling out from under my friend. I saw it crawl up to her neck, open its mouth filled with sharp, pointed teeth hand, then suddenly bite down hard, causing me to only manage a terrified scream. That horrifying scene unfolded right before my eyes. I couldn't bear it anymore. I just felt my vision blur, then fainted from extreme fear. I slept right through until the next morning, completely oblivious to anything else. In the morning, I kept wondering if it was just a nightmare, but the more I thought about it, the more incredibly real it seemed. So I went to my aunt, who is very knowledgeable about spiritual matters, and asked her to introduce me to a grandmaster rumored to be very skilled. That afternoon, as dusk was approaching, I led the grandmaster to my friend's rental room. At that time, my friend had just woken up and was lying in bed, looking very tired. Upon entering the room, the Taoist master immediately walked over to where my friend was lying and observed the complexion of her face. Instantly, the grandmaster's face darkened, looking extremely serious. He then said that the baby my friend had aborted previously refused to leave and was still lingering in this room, which made me terrified, begging him to save my friend. Hearing him say that, my friend seemed a bit annoyed. She then suspiciously asked me if he was a reliable person. Hearing her words, the Taoist master frowned, seemingly a little angry as well. He then turned towards the window without saying anything further. Afterwards, he reached out and decisively pulled the curtain completely shut. The small room, which only had light from the window, was now pitch dark. Then, he took out a small, seemingly mystical vial from his pocket. He then dripped a few drops of a blood-like liquid onto two of his fingers. He said it was the blood of a black dog that had been raised for over 3 years. While we were still wondering what it was for, he approached the dressing table mirror. Then, he used his 2 fingers, stained with dog blood, to smear 2 long streaks on the mirror. Afterwards, he turned back, sternly telling my friend to look in the mirror and she would understand what was happening. The Grandmaster's gaze was so solemn that my friend dared not doubt him anymore. She turned to glance at me, her eyes questioning. I nodded, signaling my friend to do as the Taoist master said. Seeing my determined look, she swallowed hard, then mustered all her courage and tremblingly walked to the mirror. When my friend sat down and looked in the mirror, she saw nothing. To be honest, as far as I can see, apart from being a bit dirty, there's nothing strange about the mirror. My friend's voice was tinged with sarcasm. Then, that Grandmaster took out a handkerchief and wiped it a few times. The bloodstains were thus cleaned off. I peeked into the mirror. The mirror was now clean of bloodstains but still showed nothing unusual. I was just about to turn to the Grandmaster with a question, but right at that moment I saw my friend's whole body begin to tremble violently. She stammered my name, saying there was a ghost. Only then did I realize that the image my friend saw in the mirror was completely different from what I saw. She saw a baby, its whole body purple, clinging tightly to her neck, lying prostrate on her shoulder, refusing to let go. The words my friend just uttered sent a chill down my spine. Cold sweat poured out as if I had been doused. Then she let out a blood-curdling scream and fainted. The Taoist master sighed, silently lamenting that young people nowadays don't know how to protect themselves. In the end, they are the ones who suffer. Afterwards, he took out many talismans, candles, and other items and began to perform a deliverance ceremony. From that day on, my friend's complexion gradually improved day by day. Perhaps having taken the Taoist master's words to heart for the remaining 2 years of college, I saw that my friend never dated another boyfriend.